isn't.
Why would you lie to your religion on your deathbed?
Exactly. If he was such a papist, and, Roman Catholic, he's that devout, then it doesn't make sense that he would lie. And yet, they right away, they took Sam Adams' word for truth, and the Sons of Liberty and the Patriots all took action. So it makes you think if people were more critically thinking about things back then, we might not even be America as we are now,
Yeah. To the British, this was a false, rotten use of bigotry, and an immoral means characteristic of the revolutionaries, or the Sons of Liberty. To the Sons of Liberty and to the Patriots, Sam Adams' action was brilliant strategy and a godsend lifesaver. That's pretty extreme contrast.
It is. And then he says, today we may look back and regard Adams' action in the same light as the British did. But remember that we are not today involved in a revolution against the British Empire.
Yeah.
Which is very true. Like right now if we were fighting Britain, we might be like, oh, well, they're still jerks.
Yeah.
But no, we're not. So we have it's like you have a clear mind, Just like when you're angry, you can't think straight and you're biased,
Yeah.
But if you're not angry and you're pretty calm and level-headed, then you more or less you can feel like you're making a more educated decision. And yet, I don't know, that's so weird and it's like such a big impact on our whole government, our whole lives.
So on page 32,
Mm-hmm.
The fifth rule of ethics of the means and ends is that concern with ethics increases with the number of means available and vice versa.
Right.
So
if you have the ability to choose between different venues, then sometimes, well, this means is better, this means is better. But if you have a very narrow, small pickings, you don't know exactly. You feel like this is your only way to get to the end, so you're gonna take whatever means you can.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in one of those desperate situations, as compared to someone who has a lot of different choices, and see, if one lacks the luxury of a choice and is possessed of only one means, then the ethical question will never arise. Automatically, the lone means becomes endowed with the moral spirit. Its defense lies in the cry, what else could I do? If one possesses the choice of a number of effective and powerful means, is always accompanied by that ethical concern and serenity of conscience, so admirably described by Mark Twain as the calm confidence of a Christian holding 4 aces. So if you have so many different choices, then you can sit back and you can think about it. But if you don't, you just take what you have and you go and you don't question it.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose that could be Sam Adams. He knew that for him the ends was the revolution, and with Carr's confession, the only way, he just saw one way to kind of put that confession to rest, and no one would think twice about it, so he just used it. He didn't think about if it's ethical or not. And this is one thing I kind of like about Alinsky too. He puts his own experiences in there. And on page 33 he says, during a conflict with a major corporation, I was confronted with the threat of public exposure of a photograph of a motel Mr. and Mrs. registration and photographs of my girl and myself. I said, go ahead and give it to the press. I think she's beautiful, and I've never claimed to be celibate. Go ahead. That ended the threat. So that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
That he was like, so she's my girl, what do you You know, what is that going to do? And that just didn't even try after that. And yet he says if he had
a chance to fight that way, like, he wouldn't do it.
Yeah. If he had a chance to do the same thing to them, which I think he says that he did, right? That someone came over and yet he goes on to say that, however,
but if I had been convinced that the only way we could win was to use it, then without any reservations I would have used it.
Just like he said here.
The fact that 40,000 poor would lose their war against hopelessness and despair was just too tragic.
If it meant all of those people suffering
just for his own moral.
Just so he could say that he could die saying, well, I never compromised, or that's actually a word that he talks about later, a compromised, or I was never corrupt, you know? I stayed true the whole time.
And yet meanwhile, 40,000 were let down.
The whole purpose behind his struggles was lost. Oh, I liked this. He's so sarcastic that makes me laugh. It's true that I might have trouble getting to sleep because it takes time to tuck those big, angelic moral wings under the covers. To me, that would be utter immorality. I thought that was hilarious. I laughed out loud.
That is funny.
Which makes sense. I mean, you know, what's the use of being perfect if you're not going to help anyone?
Yeah.
So, it's true. I mean,
what's the use of being moral and virtuous if it only benefits yourself? Like, that's kind of hypocrisy.
Yeah. So I guess Sam Adams, you know, maybe that's how he felt. Like, I'm really helping everyone by telling this lie about this man. So, one man was categorized as a liar and a papist or whatever, just so the rest of us could have freedom. Doesn't sound like it. Too bad.
There can be no, on page 34, there can be no such thing as a successful trader, for if one succeeds, he becomes a founding father.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's like what we said before about the Declaration of Independence being a declaration of war. And like what we said before about everything.
Yeah.
So, I just thought that was cool.
Oh, I like this one. On page 35, the 9th rule is that any effective means is automatically judged by the opposition as being unethical. I mean, if we're in a war with Britain and we did something, of course they're going to say that that's unethical because it's against them. You know, we're challenging them, just like you said, no one wants to be challenged. So, if we do challenge them, well, that's not right. And how is it not right? Well, because you're challenging me. It's not even so much as that it's, you know, really like an outright sin or some
it's
sort of
denial of their human right to question. Oh, I like this. The gorilla, Francis Marion, the swamp fox, he used guerrilla tactics against Cornwallis and the British Army. And so they denounced him as a criminal, and he did not engage in warfare like a gentleman or a Christian. I just think that's hilarious.
Yeah. So, as long as you kill people in a nice way, it's okay. You know, you do that. But if you do it sneaky and kind of in a roundabout, unorthodox method, then
there's a Christian way of killing people, and then there's an unchristian way of killing people.
If you're not doing it the Christian way, you're a very bad man. It just doesn't make sense. Just maybe, I mean, it makes sense to them apparently, but it just sounds like a bunch of idle chatter.
Mm-hmm.
And then he starts talking about 37 Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes on for a good while about Gandhi and how the whole revolution was based on like peaceful and non-violent protests, and yet a couple years later, I guess, they turned to weapons and force to maintain what they had, you know. So see right here on the 39. We might note that once India had secured independence, when Nehru was faced with a dispute with Pakistan over Kashmir, he did not hesitate to use armed force. Now the power arrangements had changed. India had the guns and the trained army to use these weapons. Any suggestion that Gandhi would not have approved the use of violence is negated by Nehru's own statement in that 1961 interview. It was a terrible time when the news reached me about Kashmir. I knew I would have to act at once with force. Gandhi said nothing to indicate his disapproval. It was a great relief, I must say. If Gandhi, the vigorous non-violent, didn't demur, it made my job a lot easier. This strengthened my view that Gandhi could be adaptable. So, just because someone sort of preaches non-violence doesn't mean that they're not gonna resort to it if it's the only way, you know. And he had said earlier too on earlier pages that if Gandhi had guns, he probably would have used them. If he had the force and the strength to make a revolution, like a war revolution, then that would have been, he might have gone for that. But he didn't, so he decided to do it the only way he could.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's true. I mean, is it better to be nonviolent and win and have, you know, long suffering, or if he had the guns and he could have done it in like a few weeks, you know, have a big battle, that's the end of it, India has their independence, you know. It's one of those things. And then I think this is his last.
I guess that's what it all comes down to, is like, what does morality really mean when it comes to the situation of the entire populace?
Right.
Like the oppressed.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And the last rule is goals must be phrased, page 45, goals must be phrased in general terms like liberty, equality, fraternity, of the common welfare, pursuit of happiness, or bread and peace. Whitman put it, the goal once named cannot be countermanded. So he says if we just kind of generalize it and make it sound like it's for the good of everyone, then it's ethical. So, I mean, it doesn't matter that in order to get there, we'll probably have to kill a lot of people and bring someone lots of pain, but it's for the good of everyone, so we'll go ahead.
A word about words.
I really like this chapter. And he talks about how certain words have negative meanings to them when they really shouldn't, and they shouldn't be shied away from or sugar-coated because the word is what it is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Negative meanings and all. It's just, the first one is power.
Power, self-interest, compromise, and conflict.
Mm-hmm.